know-nothing riots of Louisville. The way it had happened, you had the May primaries, and then you had the August general election, and then May primaries you had the know-nothing had won the mayoral race. So the know-nothing John Barbie, he winds up winning. James Speed takes off, goes to Chicago, never comes back. But John Barbie is the know-nothing, and so now you have a new mayor in town. So that's in the May election. Once you see that you got the know-nothing mayor coming into town, you want to get as many know-nothings in power, so that way you have, you know, a coalition. So on August 6th, during the election, you have all the know-nothings saying we need to get out and go vote. You know, they just elected a know-nothing mayor, 1855. So this spread alarm for the Irish and the German immigrants and the Catholics, because they were known as a foreign influence, and they didn't want the foreign influence there, right? The nativists were pissed off. The white Christians were trying to be more white and more Christian. It just goes to show you there's a continuity, right? So you have, you know, the War of 1812, murdering Indians. You have the Revolutionary War, murdering Indians. You have Jackson, Taylor, Louisville. You see, in Louisville you have, who's that president? The Taylor, damn it. This pissed me off a little bit. Okay, anyways, in Louisville, let's see, there's only two presidents that come out of Kentucky, and then one's Lincoln, who was born, even though you have Indiana who says that it's his boyhood home, and then Illinois says this is the land of Lincoln, but Kentucky claims Lincoln for the birth, right, and probably Bowie, but that's, anyways, the president, Zachary Taylor. Okay, so Zachary Taylor comes from Louisville, and he was in the Mexican-American War. So the murdering Native Americans, murdering Mexicans, expanding the country, making a big old empire, right? Big old colonizing, imperializing, paternalistic, white, male, Protestant, aristocracy. You got the ruling class, right? So the white, male, ruling class. We see the same sort of type of ruling class being copied over and over. So you have, you know, this massive sort of anti-black, you know, pro-slavery, anti-African American sentiments. You have anti-Native American sentiments, so anti-brown skinned people, anti-Mexican, so anti-brown, anti-black. And then it gets to be right before the Civil War, which is a war over the institution of slavery, right? The 1855. Essentially, they're saying that now they're looking at differences amongst white people or amongst light-skinned people, right? So you're brown, you're black, and it's like, wait, you're not white and Christian enough. You look like a different white Christian than me. So the racism was going to another level in the 1850s. So the racism is going to a whole other level where they're Germans, which is Anglo-Saxon, actually comes from Germany. So for white Anglo-Saxon English Protestants to hate German people or Irish people makes little sense, especially in America. Over there, maybe they have like histories. Maybe they're like the Sunnis and Shiites or some shit. But in this country, they're the exact same, right? They're viewed with the same suspicion, right? They're foreigners, right? So they're exact. But the Irish is right next to England. When you think of Great Britain, Ireland is part of Great Britain. In the War of 1812, the United States declares war on Great Britain and Ireland, so they make sure they name Ireland specifically. So the idea of them hating, you know, Irish speak a different, I guess, dialect, Gaelic language. Do they speak a whole other language? Germans speak up a whole other language and have a whole other culture, but not totally. You know what I mean? The fact that the Anglo-Saxons came from Germany, they went to England and, you know, eventually developed a whole other, you know, I guess the conquering country that eventually takes over America and spreads its influence far and wide. England, but that England, just because that didn't have to be like that, you know what I mean? The Spanish or the Portuguese or the Dutch or the French could have all had colonies which would have expanded. And the only reason that English expanded in America, I mean, I don't know how we would have been if we were still under British rule. So anyways, So that's what the 1855 Know Nothing Riot says. So when you actually look at the thing, so essentially you had the Know Nothing person who is elected on in May, and then there's 8 wards. So there's only like 50,000 people in Louisville at the time, and there's 1 out of 3 people were Germans or Irish or foreign born. So that means the majority of the people were actually American nativists. So clearly they had the majority, they had the votes, they had the people. You know, just do they have the solidarity? Was the racism, you know, in solidarity with everybody else? And really, it's like the Mississippi plan, where they use violence. The Ku Klux Klan used violence to keep black people away from the voting polls. There's also poll taxes and literacy tests and property requirements. So poll taxes, literacy tests, and property requirements were also going to be used for the German and Irish immigrants. So they're using all the same tactics. Basically, it's racism, you know, to the nth degree. There's riots, there's lynchings, there's at least 22 are dead that conservatives say. The bishop says there's over 100 that are murdered. So that's, you know, it just shows that the racism of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you know, original pioneers who got here, the Plymouth Rock Puritans, they are the people who are perpetuating this horrible, you know, this ball of racism where they can't stop themselves. They just hate blacks, they hate browns, they hate everybody, and now they're hating you. So the way the thing works out is you got May, they vote for the mayor, and then in in August 6th, they're voting in the 8 different regions, the 8 different voting wards for the representatives and the, let's see, I think it's like the state representatives and the city, right? I'll get to it. But the idea is that there's eight wards, so that's pretty manageable, right? And once they took the mobs took over each ward, so that any place that people would vote, they would intimidate them and scare them, or they would lock them out of the house and say, you can't come inside here. And so that's what they would do, is that they would lock them outside, and then once they realized that they couldn't vote, then the Germans and Irish people would go home, and then their votes didn't count, it didn't matter. So about noon they realized they weren't going to get the vote, and then just pandemonium and craziness out in the streets. So, you know, the know-nothings realized when you used violence, when you used sort of intimidation tactics, you win, right? And unfortunately that is true. August 6th elections was for state officers and congressmen, okay? So the state officers and the congressmen, so it was for the federal government and the federal seats, and it was for the state seats. So that was basically the know-nothings already become the mayors, but now you could expand, you know, your power for the feds and also for the to the states. And I think actually you have the governor. The governor is elected as a know-nothing, and then Millard Fillmore was elected. So you have, you know, you have like basically Millard Fillmore was 1953 or 1850, so or 1850 to 1853. So I think he was you know, president right at that time. So he starts this know-nothing wave, and it happens across not just in Cincinnati and Louisville, but also in Cincinnati and Columbus, I think Pittsburgh and some other cities. There's like this violence or rumblings that's going on. New Orleans, they had felt it, so the German communities had clenched up together waiting for that type of crap to happen, but that shit happened right here in Louisville. Louisville, you know, if you look at actually just the whole span of timeline, 1855 know-nothing riots, if you look at the whole timeline of like integration, segregation, just terms of racism and white supremacy. You had the riots in 1975 was essentially for an entire year. So you had the white supremacist riots in 1975 in Louisville. So you only got 3 riots, main riots. You got the white supremacist riots in 1975. You got the Black Power riots in 1968. Then you got the anti-German, anti-Irish, anti-Catholic, know-nothing riots of 1855. That's it. You only got 3 riots in Louisville. That's it. You only got 3 of them. Okay, so see, they're easy to look at and easy to remember and see what we can learn from each one of them. All basically race-based, you know, ethnicity, cultural-based, all socially constructed bullshit, socially constructed horseshit. Okay, so the 1975, the reason why that's significant is because that took about a year. It was a year long. It considered a mini civil war by Blaine Hudson. I don't know specifically, there wasn't like 1 or 2 incidents or a day's worth of violence, but it seems like it was a year's worth of violence to stop the integration of black students into white schools. They had waited, supposedly, you know, Louisville was like one of the first ones to integrate, but they had waited for about 20 years before they actually mandated that all schools had to be integrated. They integrated a few token schools to make it seem like they were doing, you know, moving in the right directions, but actually Louisville is one of the last places, last cities in the country to integrate. So we waited till 1975 to finally allow black kids to go into the white schools. Now, is that a good idea? Is that a good idea for white people? Is it a good idea for black people? MLK was worried about, you know, integrating into a burning building. Do you want to integrate into a burning building? Or, you know, build your own thing, your own independent movement. So, that happened in 1975, and then in 2007 we had actually integrated with Meredith decision, the Supreme Court decision, which said that you can't base your school assignment plan based on race. You can't say put the black kids with the white kids anymore. You can't use that as a determining factor. You can only use sort of race-based measures, you know, education, amount of parents in the household, and poverty and things like that. But you can't actually say race. You can't actually, and that's the law of the land. So we were the last to integrate, and we're becoming the first to segregate. So there's been a long continuity of racism in Louisville, and since we have 80 to 90% white women in the public education schools at JCPS, none of them of which will mention John Henry Whalen or the 1855 Know Nothing riots. Julie Chancellor, specifically a teacher, is pro-censorship, ruined, attempted $50,000. I'm out $50,000 because of her, because I want to talk about the 1855 Know Nothing riots. I know a lot about the topic and the issue, and I think it opens up a whole can of worms about who we are as people and what it is we're doing here, you know, and also it's indicative of an event, of a greater study of, like, you know, lots of influences of lots of things that are happening in this time period. Especially, it's one of the most boring time periods ever. Anyways, so when you look at the entire thing, you know, there's racism that goes on from the century, from the very beginning all the way to the very end. I don't see where racism isn't there. They killed a bunch of black kids, and then you had the Ku Klux Klan was marching with the police. And the police, you know, historically were the ones that would catch the slaves, and they were the Fugitive, you know, Slave Act. They would enforce the Fugitive Slave Act and get, if George Washington's slaves ran away, you had the police that would come and bring them back in. And that's how things worked in Butchertown. So 1855 Know Nothing riots began in Butchertown. It happened in the Germantown, the part of Louisville that it happened. They burned down this brewery, this alcoholic place, and then they get drunk on it, and they stop getting drunk. They stop burning and getting, like, you know, rowdy because they're all drunk. So actually, there's 2 like riots that had happened. There's people that's getting shot. Nobody's allowed to vote anywhere. But the 2 riots where the mob just goes on a rampage against, like, rows of people. There was the Irish one, and then there was a German one. The German one was in Butchertown, and in Butchertown they burned down the German brewery. And when they burned down the brewery, they had drunk a bunch right before they burnt it down. And because they were all drunk, that kind of settled them down. They passed out, went home, and just, you know, said, fuck it, who cares? But in the Irish neighborhoods, they didn't do that. And so the Irish neighborhoods, there was actually more wanton destruction. And again, you know, they said that the bishop, Martin Spalding, said over 100 Irish and Germans had been murdered. Whole families were burned inside their houses, entire families, okay? So the fact that they only list 22, I wonder if the coroner, if anybody did their homework afterwards. You have all these German newspapers and these nativist newspapers. I don't see how anybody didn't, you know, there should be a body list somewhere, and that body list should be published because, I don't know, maybe reparations. Somebody deserves to be, you know. Anyways, no, not reparations, but this does give me an indication of how my German ancestors were treated when they came to America. They were in Sanford Town, a Germantown, but it was close to Covington, so they probably had to learn English and had to get their kids to learn English, but at the same time they wanted to retain their own culture. But how long were they allowed to retain their own culture? Until World War I and World War II. And so the 1855 Know Nothing riots, does that start a sort of a pro-American, you know, or an anti-Europeanism And does nations even matter? Does, you know, what national identity we associate ourselves, like, why are we Americans, or are we Kentuckians, or are we Louisvillians, or are we Tennesseans, or Floridians, or Tallahasseans? And how does that matter? It almost seems like if you accept that label, then you're a, you know, sheep of part of the farm, and they can use you for cannon fodder or an obedient worker.